Hello, CiCan attendees. My name is David Cadet, and I come from one of the co-hosts of this year's event here in Calgary, the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology, aka SAIT. You can see my SAIT email address at the bottom of this slide. I'll give you a whole whack of contact information at the end of my little song and dance here. So the title of my song and dance is The 8 Pillar Competencies, what they are, where they went, and how we get them back. If you are at all familiar with competency-based education, well, these are the 8 competencies which I feel must be entrenched, emphasized, enhanced within us all before we could even begin learning through CBE or teaching through CBE. And as the subtitle of my book, The Daily Undoing, is called Being Better at Being Human. And it's an exercise book. It's a workout book to practice these 8 pillar competencies. So here we go. You know where we're starting. You know who I am. Let's begin. Okay, so here's what we're going to do over the next 20 minutes or so. We're going to discuss something I call the competency hot potato. If you know what hot potato is, it's sort of an English language colloquialism, but I'll explain that to you in a minute. We'll do an overview of all 8 pillar competencies and how they've evolved. I want to focus in a little bit on what I call the most important of the 8 pillar competencies, and I also refer to it quite slangily as competencies gateway drug. In other words, if you don't get curiosity, you're not going to get the rest of the 7 pillar competencies. I want to talk a little bit about how I've used my book and integrate it into the teaching and learning that I participate in. And I'll open things up for discussion, although this is a recorded presentation. So to that end, I'll leave my contact information at the end of this deck and strongly encourage you to get in touch with me if you want to have a discussion offline. All right, let's get on with it. And I will be turning my camera off and on because in some cases, if I have my camera on, you won't see the important stuff behind it. And what could be more important than the definition of a hot potato? Kind of an English language colloquialism. I don't know where it came from, but it is in one dictionary or another. And it's defined as a problem, situation, etc. that is difficult to deal with and causes a lot of disagreement. It is kind of a visual thing as well. The hot potato means it's something that no one wants to hold because it's hot. I don't know why it's a potato. A hot coal or a hot log might have been more fitting, but we call it the hot potato. So what do I mean when I say the competency hot potato? Well, it starts with a problem. And the problem comes first from employers to people like me, college instructors, with the question, why don't you teach students how to problem solve? And then we turn around and kind of blame it on the high school teachers and say, why don't you teach students how to think critically? And then the high school teachers turn around and they might go to junior high teachers or even parents' households. And of course, this isn't all literal, but we're certainly thinking these things. Why aren't kids more curious today? So everyone's sort of passing the buck, the hot potato. And that's how we end up with this situation where we have a great deal. I don't know what the statistics are, but if I talked to a lot of employers and teachers when putting this whole thing together and noted that this is what employers are missing the most and what they covet the most are these pillar competencies. Colleges are great at teaching technical skills, sometimes called hard skills, whereas what I'm talking about today are sometimes called soft skills, which is a rather unfortunate term, but nevertheless, that's how they're understood. So we're great at teaching the technical skills, but a lot of times we forget to teach or even include or think about these soft skills or these competencies, as I like to call them. And so I realized, this is me when I had no hair, a couple of years ago, when I sort of began this journey, I discovered that I couldn't any longer just pass the buck, that I was part of the problem, because I certainly wasn't even acknowledging these things, much less teach them. So that's where I began my journey on really kind of getting a granular look at competencies, like the actual building blocks of competency-based education. So as I said earlier on, I see these 8 pillar competencies as very foundational in the formation and even the execution of competency-based education. And if you're familiar with CBE, you have a good idea of how it works. If you're not, I'll just oversimplify it by saying it's sort of lighter on the theory and academics and heavier on experiential and practical. It enhances the competencies required for jobs and careers. And seeing as this conference is all about growing talent, this competency-based education movement, I hope will gain some more traction. So how did I come up with these 8 pillars, as I call them? Well, first of all, through personal experience, having spent 20 or so years in the classroom. Many of you probably can relate to this. I began to wonder why my students aren't more curious, and why do they always kind of look for pat answers or quick answers. And of course, Google didn't do us any favors in this regard. But the art of critical thinking, even the thought of critical thinking, seemed to have become kind of a lost art. So all of these competencies that you see around the circle here came from personal experience, knowing that there were gaps there, but it was really emphasized when I started talking to industry. And I'm well connected with local and even national industry leaders and employers who told me, these are the things that we're finding missing from our new employees. And a lot of secondary scholarly research took place as well. So I took a look at a lot of the provincially founded educational research that went into this to discover that there were common threads through all of these lists, whether it was Alberta or Ontario or Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia. I mean, all provincial educational agencies had a list. There's this competency-based education thing is growing, and it's being pushed and encouraged more and more at the provincial level. So there are the usual suspects that land on all of those lists. And these include some of them, and then I added some of my own. For instance, character is a competency that I decided to include as an 8-pillar competency because I figured, character is something that we build throughout our lives, and it's formed a lot by people that have influence over us, but we never really work on it. We never really take the time to get the reps in. So I wanted character to be foundational to competency-based education as well. Collaboration, of course, is self-explanatory, the ability to play well with others. Critical thinking, as I alluded to earlier, the ability to really make decisions based upon entire big picture views and seeing both sides or all sides of a decision. Problem solving sort of speaks for itself. Someone said I should call this complex problem solving, and then I would have 8 C words. But I didn't think of that until I published the book. So problem solving, not only between people, but kind of at the foundation of design thinking is problem solving. Like, here's a problem. Is it really a problem? How big is the problem? How do we begin to solve it? Citizenship. So we've talked a lot over the last few years in class, and business class in particular, about corporate social responsibility. Citizenship asserts that we as individuals must have our own sort of personal social responsibility as well. And again, our citizenship pillar competency allows us to practice and exercise that. Communication speaks for itself. Creativity is sort of that design thinking model, identifying problems that all humans or many humans experience, and then looking at that problem with empathy, and then beginning the design thinking process. At the center of my circle here, I have what is really the epicenter, the formulation of competencies, because a lot of people call these skills. And I kind of cringe at skills because skills are really a component of a competency. And as you can see in my little Venn diagram here, we've come up with, and when I say we, my partner and I who worked on the formation of this, Marc Boivin from the University of Calgary, decided that we were going to follow some known and used frameworks and then sort of integrate some of our own thoughts. And attitude was one of those original thoughts. The initial, or one of the original A words that goes into this system was all about ability. We thought having a learning, open-minded attitude was more important. So it kind of runs in counterclockwise here from the top. So you must have an attitude willing to learn, and then you learn and you accumulate knowledge, but you really can't prove knowledge and attitude until you've demonstrated a skill at it. So these three things are really the makeup of a competency. So when we talk about competencies, we're talking about something much wider and I think much more important than just a skill. We're talking about a three-part framework here. So I did a podcast on this in the year 2020, which was a great year to begin anything. And I began a podcast. I began a daily podcast January 1, 2020. Little did I know what was coming down my highway, as did any of you. But it was a podcast where every day I focused on one of these 8 pillar competencies. I provided some insight as to what these competencies mean, using those exact words, and then I provided an action verb to practice that competency on a daily basis. And I went into this knowing that I was in effect writing a manuscript for what would become a book at the end of all this. And so the podcast was called The Daily Undoing, meaning that I wanted to evangelize this new way of doing things and a new habit to form, a new way of forming habits that had nothing to do with old ways and had something to do with new ways. A workout manual for the brain, I think, is a good way to describe it, and as someone described it to me. So it went from a podcast to a printed book, which I can tell you about as we go along here as well. So I went from the book publication to amplifying the book. The book kind of gave me justification to become chief evangelizer of competency-based education, of the 8 pillar competencies, of the competency framework, and so on. And through my own knowledge of how to work media a little bit, I sent out some press releases, and I got some traction and some airplay with good old CBC here in Calgary. And at one point, I think one of the episodes went nationwide. Thank you, Russell Bowers from Daybreak, Alberta. I was featured on several different podcasts, got some social media play, and even got to speak at some conferences south of the border. So I've done a lot of that and continue to do a lot of that. Really, as I said, evangelizing the importance of these pillar competencies as a foundational part of competency-based education. Then from amplification to application. By that point in the journey, some books were being circulated. Some people were sending me pictures of what they were doing in the pages of the book. And I got to tell you, so rewarding to actually see this materialize, much as it was rewarding to see it being used in my classes, which I'll get to later. I also tried to get people to become more involved in some of the other things that I was doing related to the podcast and the book. I was doing some blogging on thedailyundoing.com, and I was pointing people there by luring them in with a quiz. Who doesn't like a quiz, especially when it's all about you? So I promoted this quiz on social media and drove people to the website. And once they got there, they were prompted to take this quiz to determine which of the 8 was their strongest. And in order to take the quiz, of course, they had to give me their email address so that I could reach out to them personally. So I was really getting into, as I said, just really trumpeting the value of these 8 pillar competencies, the attitude, knowledge, skill, framework, and just competency-based education in general. So I began to reflect again, now looking at what I had written and how well I was actually applying it myself. And there were several cues that made me have these thoughts. One of them came from one of my students who was doing a lot of videos at the time, right around the George Floyd episode, which was also in 2020. She, being a Black woman, started to do a series of videos about racial equity, and I started to think, how socially active am I? I mean, I've written about citizenship and character being these core competencies, and how much am I actually practicing these things myself? The other stark reminder, anyone from Canada living in Canada at that time would have known that that was the year that the real true breakout, the critical mass awareness of Canada's residential school program really became widely known, and the ugliness and The horrifying nature of it became, front page news for several weeks and months of that year, and continues today, although not as frequent. It was that year that all of these burial grounds were being identified and unearthed. So again, I'm thinking to myself, how can I be more involved? I mean, I was actually alive when some of these schools were still in practice, so I could no longer, blame the past horrors of humanity on generations that preceded me. Going out and visiting Vancouver Island, which is a place that my family and I frequent every year. And that particular year, there was this very uncommon heat wave on Vancouver Island with soaring temperatures. And again, made me think, reflecting to myself, I've written this book about doing good by planet and people, and how good am I doing myself. And maybe the biggest spur of them all was seeing my daughter place a copy of my book on her bookshelf. Nothing will hit you harder, any parent will tell you, than looking into the eyes of one of your children and coming clean. It's practically more powerful than looking in the mirror. So I saw this and I thought, well, I have to be a better practitioner of these competencies myself. So I began integrating the competencies into courses. And the first course that I introduced it to was something called Innovation and Design, which is a course that I've developed here at SAIT. And I had my students take some of the pages of the book, The Daily Undoing, and conduct some innovative experiential learning exercise out in the wild. And this is one of my students taking one of those daily undoing exercises and practicing it.
Hi there, this is my design think number 1 assignment. I decided to do it right out front of my house here. I live at 1115 14th Street Northwest. This nice view of downtown. I was sitting on this step right here, just observing what was going on outside, just out front of my house for the last half hour here. It was really smoky and hazy outside. I feel like probably a lot of different people noticed that. It's kind of affecting me a little bit. It's really dry, as you can see. My skin is super dry and flaky, and it's been bothering me all day. It's a really busy street, 14th Street, one of the busiest streets in Calgary. Lots of cars driving by, all different kinds of cars, all different kinds of people in them. Some look happy, some look sad. Some are looking at me like I'm crazy for standing out front here with my phone. I kind of wonder about these people a little bit, like what's stressing them out in their lives. I know I feel a little bit stressed today, and I wonder if that's how they feel as well. Just what stresses them out and how they think about things. People seem to be in a hurry for some reason. I don't know, I feel like people are always in a hurry. Like they're always trying to get somewhere right now. And maybe if we decided to live in the moment a bit more, maybe we'd be a little bit happier. I don't know. People always seem to be thinking about what's next instead of what's going on right now. And I feel like I think like that quite a bit too. I don't really focus on the moment, focus too much on things that are out of my control. And a way to channel the moment would be like something that I really think I should try to sort out, because it seems like these people are just all, just driving by in a hurry. There's a couple. The other things that I kind of noticed too. There's a couple. My neighbor's house, and then this house down here, dilapidated and kind of worn down. And I wonder about how these houses got that way. Especially this one over here. This house, it's burnt down. I'm curious as to what happened there. How that happened, maybe how it could be prevented, something like that. My neighbor's house too. It seems like they're never home. Like, I don't know what they do, if they have a job. And I wonder, if they have a job, they work this much, do they enjoy that? Do they enjoy all the work they have to do? I know personally I wouldn't enjoy working that much. That's and then just the downtown as well. Obviously, there's a beautiful view outside of my front door here. I took that in quite a bit. Think about I really just like the sheer amount of people that are down there right now at the same time, all working towards something different. It's kind of almost overwhelming to think of it. But yeah, so that's what I observed here this afternoon out front of my house. And yeah, thank you very much.
All right, my student Lachlan there, executing one of the 366 competency workouts from the book. That would have been under the competency heading of curiosity. It was an exercise that I loved doing in that class, where I send students out to become expert noticers. The art of noticing is another lost art. So I got him thinking about him and the other couple of dozen students taking that course to think about what's going through the minds of passersby, to really tap into that empathetic nerve. So that's how I began to integrate it into courses that I was teaching. Around the same time, I was also developing an entrepreneur course for Medicine Hat College called Creativity and Changing Perspectives. And I was given permission, in fact, I was encouraged to use a couple of competency exercises from my book for each of the modules of this course. So that was really rewarding to be able to see this theory, this train of thought going into formal practice. So what do those activities look like? Without overselling you on the book, which I hope I'm not doing, I wanted to give you a peek at what they kind of look like. So this was part of that Creativity and Changing Perspectives course for Medicine Hat College. This is how it would have looked on their learning management system or a printed out PDF, something we called a creativity surge. And what it did is it pointed them to a specific page of the book. I called each of the actual exercises episodes just to coordinate it with my podcast. And I asked them to go through and do an exercise from the book and then take a picture of their exercise as completed on the actual page of the book and then upload it into the Dropbox of the LMS. So it was really cool to see the kinds of things that students were scribbling into their workbooks, because that's really what the Daily Undoing is. And nothing more rewarding. No number of sales, no number of signed books were anywhere near as rewarding as seeing people actually use this and awakening these competencies within them. I started to make some sketch animation videos as well as a part of my evangelizing of competency-based education. This would have been part of that Medicine Hat College course. I'm not even sure if this is going to play, but we'll see. Let's see
When thoughts collide. Our pillar competencies, those innate capabilities we possess that enable us to improve as humans, are in constant interaction with one another. They are interdependent, even though they sometimes present themselves as being at cross purposes. Creativity spurs new and different ideas, while critical thinking applies logic, objectivity, and evaluation, sometimes resulting in self-doubt, which can kill potentially great ideas before they even have a chance. So creativity seems to be in constant collision with critical thinking. However, these are better viewed as counterbalances than opposing forces. Creativity and critical thinking produce many what-if questions. Here, to practice both the pillar competencies of creativity and critical thinking, it is as important to produce a list of unexpected outcomes of an idea or decision as it is to predict expected results. To unexpect rather than simply to expect. Try seeing what likely wouldn't happen from a choice you make today as a potential outcome to spur a new way of creative thinking. How would that outcome change the way you do something?
So I also took the liberty of making up new words for my workbook. And as you may have determined from that video, it came under the creativity competency. And again, true to the Daily Undoing mantra, I challenge students to not write down what they expect from a decision they have to make or a problem that they have to solve, but what they not necessarily would expect. So my verb, what do you unexpect from this, kind of came into being there. I didn't have to go very far to find supporters for this undoing way of thinking, and particularly curiosity. Of course, none other than Albert Einstein himself was quoted as saying, "I really have no special talent. I just happen to be passionately curious." Once again, this is why I continue to come back to curiosity as the gateway drug to learning all of these competencies. Here's what one of the pages looks like in the actual book. This was the exercise that I had Lachlan and his classmates do that you saw in the video earlier on. So each page of the book features a competency insight, as you see here, referring to just a very cool essay written by French Georges Perec. And he was the one that sort of spurred my idea of sending students out into the world to just become more astute observers. And then the action verb that I wanted people to do with this insight is to go and gather. In this particular case, people reading the book, not necessarily in my class, I challenged to spend 5 minutes in a busy place and in the space below, record the mundane things that they observed. So part of this is really about self-awareness and self-improvement. The subtitle of the book, as I referred to earlier on, is called Being Better at Being Human. So it's not just for educators, it's not just for learners. I've used it in corporate training. I've had a lot of individuals buy the book and kind of use it for personal improvement. But it does take a little bit of humility to kind of get around the fact that maybe I'm not so good at these things. And that's one of my chief evangelizing mantras is these competencies are within us all. We just have to take them out and exercise them, much as we would if we were training for a marathon or a bodybuilding competition, or if we wanted to lose weight or gain weight or become a guitar player or a better cook. All of these things would require practice. Well, the same is said for competencies. Practice makes better. That's another mantra of competency-based education, is we never really master these competencies, but we aim to get better every day. As one of my reviewers and purchasers of the book, she was a chief science officer at a pharmaceutical company in Pennsylvania who loved the book. And I captured one of her quotes because I asked her, so why would someone like you choose to devote 10, 15 minutes of their day practicing the habits of this book? And her response was simply, I feel part of being human is improving. And I thought, bam, I wish that would have come to me before the book went to print as well, because it's just a beautiful quote that I can totally get behind. So if you want to get behind the movement, there are a number of ways of reaching me. I showed you my SAIT email address at the beginning. Once again, that's david.gaudet, Gaudet, at sait.ca. But I've set up my own website for the Daily Undoing. It's simply dailyundoing.com. My email address for the chief evangelizer of this project is dgaudet@dailyundoing.com. I'm available and frequent LinkedIn quite a bit at David Gaudet. I had a really active Instagram account during 2020, 2021, and 2022. I'm afraid that I sort of weaned myself off of it for mental health reasons. But I am still there. My handle on Instagram is at Daily Undoing. I'm even worse at X, but I do check it out periodically. Again, I'm at Daily Undoing there. And if you're interested in picking up a copy of the book, it's available at Amazon, through Chapters, and just about everywhere books are sold. So on that note, I really thank you for hanging out for this half hour. By doing so, I believe that you have a greater appreciation of the nuances of education and have the foundational, I think, idea of what competency-based education should be based upon. I look forward to having conversations with you. Let's start with any of these different contact modes. get in touch with me, and I will certainly get back to you and look forward to setting up a Teams or a Zoom call or even a coffee if you happen to be in Calgary here. So on that note, I thank you so much. My name is David Cadet. You can take a screenshot of this one last time, and I will sign out. Thank you.